Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, earlier this week, Donald Trump gave his State of the Union address to Congress, where he hailed the new American moment and struck a conciliatory tone towards the Democrats, calling for them to work together. The address is an annual speech where the president gets to set out his agenda for the next year and talk about what he's achieved so far. And here's a flavour of what he said.
Tonight, I call upon all of us to set aside our differences, to seek out common ground, and to summon the unity we need to deliver for the people. This is really the key. These are the people we were elected to serve. And just as I promised the American people from this podium 11 months ago, we enacted the biggest tax cuts and reforms in American history. We repealed the core of the disastrous Obamacare. The individual mandate is now gone. Thank heaven.
Donald Trump. Well, we're joined now by former Conservative MP and Trump Twitter critic-in-chief, Louise Mensch. What a catchy title. Welcome to the Daily Politics. Did you welcome the more conciliatory tone in his address?
I paid quite literally no attention to it. This
what,
time
the address
last
at all?
year, not really, no, because I know what's coming down in the Mueller investigation. And exactly this time last year, although the president only gives a real State of the Union, I think in his second term, he had sort of a fake address to Congress. He got half a day's good news cycle like he's getting now. And shortly after that, I think it was the General Flynn news dropped. Today, the news cycle's already moved on to this giant fight that Trump is having with the FBI over the release of the Nunes memo.
Right. I mean, you've already tweeted, I think, in response to Donald Trump's tweet, the top leadership and investigators of the FBI and the Justice Department, tweets Donald Trump, have politicised the sacred investigative process in favour of Democrats and against Republicans, something which would have been unthinkable just a short time ago. Rank and file are great people. Louise, get with the programme.
Jim Comey, Republican. Bob Mueller, Republican. He's going to have a really hard time making this case. And, of course, you know, criminal doesn't like cops. That's basically what you've got there. He can tweet all day long. Nothing is going to change. Right.
Do you think it's all coming down the track to Donald Trump?
Oh, no, I don't know. I mean, we'll probably say I've given up making predictions in politics a long time ago. If I say that, we'll have him for a second term. I do think the Trump 2.0 thing has got some traction, though. At Davos last week, in a room full of billionaires, weirdly he felt at home. Actually gave quite an interesting sort of nuanced speech about his America first doesn't necessarily mean America alone, and when America succeeds, the rest of the world comes up with him. But he's also always unable to keep it up for very long, because in the Q&A he had to go at the media again.
But he did extend a hand, though, didn't he? He did extend a hand to the Democrats. He spoke of a tide of optimism. Yeah. I mean, it is an improvement if you're looking at it from Louise's and perhaps your perspective in terms of the rhetoric.
But it's not all surface, is it? At some point he's going to come up against the investigation. He's going to come up against institutions which will hold him to some sort of
look, he has been told that he has got to come and see Mueller, and he doesn't like it. The difference between the speeches and the impromptu Q&A and the tweets is that somebody else writes the speeches. That's the difference.
Well, funnily enough, that's not the biggest revelation to make in politics, that someone else writes the politicians' speeches. That does count on.
They're not authentic, whereas the tweets are.
What about his core base? The core base is still pretty well behind him, and there will be many people that argue he's delivered to that core base, Louise.
Look, something's been delivered. The tax plan, for example, has been delivered, and people are finding out it's not as bad as all that, which is why some moderate Republicans, I think, voted for that tax plan. I'm completely uninterested in politics because we're in the middle of Watergate on steroids, and that is what I am completely focused on.
But if he has the core base behind him...
But does he really? I mean, look, the bounce that he's had from the State of the Union has got him up to a gigantic high of 42%, the highest he's ever been. He got the lowest approval ratings per Gallup for any president since polling began, as an average of his first year. So
sure, but bad polls, he's not going to care about that particularly at the moment. I mean, they will point to, in the White House, 2.4 million new jobs. People will have more money in their pockets. You talked about the tax cuts. growth is up. It's the economy, stupid.
Then why aren't his ratings higher? I mean, when you're coming to an all-time high of only 42%, when US presidents historically always over 50%, that's just not very good.
Please, that's what this programme's about. You've only just realised, and we're at the end of the show.
It's the
same thing with Brexit, and David Cameron said it so well. It's not what everyone would have chosen, but actually, has it been as bad as everyone predicted it would be? Really, has it?
Well,
yeah, it's been
Louise says.
Right. Has it?
Oh, do you mean you didn't think you thought it was going to be better? Did you?
The only thing I'm slightly surprised is it's taken this long. Yeah. But I think the guy will be removed and the stain on history will be wiped away. Orange is going to be the new orange.
Right. Well, you say that because you said on Twitter, "I'm enjoying this thoroughly. Good things are about to happen. Cornered rats bare their fangs because they're in a corner. Get your popcorn and champagne ready for the next week or so." What are the good things that are going to happen?
Well, let's see what happens straight immediately after the State of the Union. Trey Gowdy, probably the real author of this memo, suddenly announced that he's going to step down. Oh, what a surprise! He was undoubtedly forced into that, and I think what you see here is the Justice Department just not taking any rubbish from him over this ridiculous attempt to smear Chris Steele.
Is that worth getting the champagne and popcorn out for as far as you're concerned?
No, I think what's going to happen is the Mueller interview with Trump is worth getting the champagne and popcorn out for. Let's just not muck about with the edges.
Right.
It's not a done deal, is it? I mean, I think exactly as you said about cornered rats showing their teeth. I think if he does come into a situation which he can't just bluster his way out of, then I think we'll start seeing the kind of things we were all so scared about. And the Cameroonian, oh, it's not as bad as it looked, will actually be turn out not to be true.
Is there a point, though, Louise, in your criticism of Donald Trump, which is well documented, that it begins to spill into the sort of conspiracy theory arena, and then you start to lose people and they don't trust what you're saying?
Well, I really can't care about that because what I'm reporting is true. Conspiracy at this point is not a theory. Mueller already has 3 convictions for conspiracy against the United States from people who have admitted it, and only Paul Manafort at the moment is denying it. Just yesterday, Rick Gates decided to flip and cooperate with prosecutors. Watergate, there was a lot of nothing until all of a sudden there were dozens of indictments handed down in a single day, and that's what you're going to see this time too.
Can I just bring you to this side of the water and say, do you think Theresa May can last the course of Brexit?
Yes, I haven't paid vast attention, but she strikes me as a bit of an Angela Merkel from over the water. You always say that she's going away and always say that she's going out, and she basically isn't. She's a steady hand on the tiller, and that with all the chaos that's going on right now, I struggle to think who they would have to replace her, so I think she'll be fine. All
right, Louise Mensch, thank you very much. There's just time before we go to find out the answer to our quiz. And the question was, staying with Theresa May, what nickname have the Chinese given Theresa May? Which is it, guys?
I don't know.
It's Auntie
May.
It is Auntie May. It is. Well done.
A certain generation call her Mummy May. It's quite weird.
Oh, yeah, well, I don't want to know about that. That's it for today. Thank you to our guests, but particularly to you two for being our guests of the day. The 1 o'clock news is starting over on BBC One now. That's it from all of us here. Have a very good weekend. Bye-bye.
And Mrs May's woes don't end there. Her Brexit minister, Steve Baker, was today forced to make a humiliating apology to MPs for misleading the House of Commons. Our political correspondent, Libby Wiener, joins me live now from Westminster. So, Libby, what had Mr Baker done so wrong?
Well, ministers may not like reports landing on their desks suggesting that their plans for Brexit would make the country poorer, but the British civil service is renowned around the world for its impartiality. So suggesting, as Steve Baker did, that the officials were twisting the facts, deliberately so, to influence government policy hasn't gone down well. Moreover, he also suggested that the director of a leading think tank agreed with that analysis until a tape emerged, an audio tape, which proved him wrong, and he was forced to apologise today to MPs.
I have apologised to Mr Charles Grant, who is an honest and trustworthy man. As I have put on record many times, I have the highest regard for our hard-working civil servants. I'm grateful for this early opportunity to correct the record, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I apologise to the House.
Well, the minister also insisted that it was an honest mistake. We put it to the Prime Minister earlier whether she thought that he should resign because of all this, and she said she backed him.
Libby, thank you.
So the latest pitched battle in Trump's presidency, the release of a memo crafted by Republicans on the Intelligence Committee investigating Russian interference in the 2016 election. The president wanted it made public, saying the FBI politicized the investigative process in favor of the Democrats. The FBI says the memo is false, misleading, reckless. Our chief correspondent, Alex Thompson, is in Washington, D.C. Alex.
Well, yes, Matt. Anybody out there remember the State of the Union address? I thought not. 3 whole days ago, all that stuff about uniting the nations, then bridging the gap, a bipartisan approach to politics that Donald Trump was talking about, gone, gone, gone. What you have now is a very open, almost verbal warfare between these two key institutions of the state, the FBI on the one hand and the White House, and obviously a huge and growing political fight between Republicans and Democrats over this issue. The dodgy dossier, they are indeed using that phrase over here in America now. We've heard it somewhere before. Where's it going to go? Well, a high probability one would expect that further people in the Justice Department and possibly the FBI as well in the crosshairs of the president to be fired. We've seen that before and we may well see it again.
Ladies and gentlemen, Punxsutawney Phil!
From the Hill to the hole. Weeks of turbulence now predicted. It is Groundhog Day, and by American tradition, this marmot emerged from his hole, and his reaction was deemed to predict weeks more of winter storms.
I see my royal shadow. 6 more weeks of winter to go.
And the Hill, Capitol Hill, and the infamous Republican memo emerging to public glare, deemed the biggest political storm here since Watergate. Weeks now then of partisan rage over a wiretap, Russia, the Kremlin, the Trump election campaign, the FBI, MI6 and much, much more.
I think it's terrible. You want to know the truth? I think it's a disgrace. What's going on in this country, I think it's a disgrace. The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country.
The heart of it all, a 3.5-page memo written by Devin Nunes' staff. He's the Trump ultra-loyalist who chairs America's pivotal House Intelligence Committee. Republicans from the president down, desperate to publish it, and here's why. Essentially, the Republican Nunes memo accuses the FBI of dishonestly obtaining a court warrant for a wiretap on a Trump campaign aide because they were concerned about his possible Russian connections during the election campaign. Moreover, they say the surveillance on him relies in part on the work of a former MI6 officer, Christopher Steele. Now, he was being paid indirectly by, yes, the Clinton election campaign. So you see the message that the Republicans want the world to hear loud and clear in all this business. They say the entire FBI investigation of possible links between the Kremlin and the Trump election campaign was politically motivated.
And if American civil liberties were abused, then that needs to come to light so that that doesn't happen again. What this is not is an indictment on our institutions of our justice system.
Democrats, the FBI and elements of UK intelligence are horrified, saying the memo is a toxic Republican cut-and-paste job, damaging the intelligence community to protect the White House. In an extraordinary move, the FBI broke cover, begging the White House not to publish the Nunes memo, saying,
"We have grave concerns about material omissions of fact that fundamentally impact the memo's accuracy."
And President Trump's latest tweet treat this morning, unlikely to build any bridges with the FBI top brass here at their Washington headquarters, accusing the FBI of politicizing the sacred investigative process in favor of Democrats. Leading Democrats now rounding on the White House for playing politics, they say, with key institutions of state.
There is nothing Russia can do to us that rivals what we are doing to ourselves right now. Russia can't cause us to undermine and discredit the FBI and the Department of Justice. Russia can't persuade us not to believe our own press. Only we can do that to ourselves.
Democrats say it's another attempted smoke bomb, anything to blur the issues and undermine the biggest show in town. This man, Special Counsel Robert Mueller, steadily probing who in the Trump election camp was how close to the Russians and why. So it is that Phil the Groundhog gets to retreat again, job done, safe from winter's cold in his hole. Up on the Hill, though, to see or not to see the Nunes memo, that is the question. And now we see it. Groundhog winter or not, the heat's on.
Alex Thompson in Washington. Well, just before we came on air, I spoke to John McLaughlin, who served as both the acting and deputy director of the CIA. I asked him how damaging the memo is to the FBI and to the Department of Justice.
Well, they're both resilient organizations. They'll get up and do their jobs tomorrow. The damage really is more to the process by which we conduct this kind of activity in the United States.
When President Trump says that this memo proves that there's an anti-Trump bias in the FBI and in, the Department of Justice, does he have a point?
Case is not made. The case is not made, and I'll tell you why. Because it's issued here only by one party, by the president's party, and the opposition, the Democratic Party, says that this memo is what we call here cherry-picked, meaning to say that the party that wrote it has just picked out specific instances in which their point is made and left out the context. There is a competing Democratic memo which the majority party has so far refused to permit to be circulated. I think eventually now it will have to be circulated because the American public will be left to wonder, well, what's the other side of this argument? I mean, to put this in some context, remember now the FBI director and the Department of Justice here have objected to the circulation of this memo on those grounds that it is not entirely accurate. So to step back for a moment here, what we have is the President of the United States has authorized release to the public of a memo that his own chief law enforcement officer says is inaccurate. That's never happened in the history of our management of these sensitive issues.
So is this another example of the tribalization of American politics? Now, whether it's the media, whether it's politics, now the institutions have been dragged into this tribal warfare.
Well, I think that's not an inaccurate characterization. I can't say that that is going to be a permanent feature of our politics because it has captured everyone's attention and it has Washington in a stir. And I would just emphasize again that several months from now, I don't think anyone will remember this memo. What they will remember is the breach of a process. And I am hopeful. You know, American democracy is resilient. It has a way of self-correcting. I am hoping that this controversy will ultimately lead to everyone coming to their senses and fixing the process here.
You say it's resilient, but this is an unprecedented open warfare between the White House and these institutions. That's not very good for American democracy, is it?
No, it is not.
So where does this all end?
Well, hard to say where it ends because it is, of course, closely related to the ongoing investigation by a special counsel, Robert Mueller, former FBI director, of the Russian attempt to influence our election. There are two buckets in that investigation, two categories. One is whether there was an obstruction of justice at some point and whether there was any kind of collusion between Americans and the Russians to have this come about. The one thing that is certainly clear is that the Russians did do this. They did interfere, as I suspect they did in some of your some of your elections as well. And so this controversy is related to that. And so where does it end? I think it ends with the conclusions of Counsel Mueller's investigation. And it also ends when, as I said here in some forum yesterday, when the parties involved here do their jobs.
Okay, and we've got to end this interview. Thank you very much indeed, John McLaughlin.
Is the FBI's investigation into Donald Trump compromised by its reliance on the work of a British spy desperate to bring him down? Trump believes it is. Tonight, the US president called for the release of a top-secret memorandum which accuses the FBI of abusing its powers. The document, written by senior Republicans supportive of Trump,
criticises the way the FBI and the US Justice Department used Christopher Steele's claims to approve a wiretap on a Trump campaign advisor. Steele was, you remember, partly funded by the Democrats. Trump, as you can imagine, was not amused.
The memo was sent to Congress. It was declassified. Congress will do whatever they're going to do. But I think it's a disgrace what's happening in our country.
So why does this matter? These questions of memos, dossiers, intelligence from spies can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. So what is the bigger picture here? Niall Stanage, the associate editor at The Hill, joins me now live from Washington, D.C. Just put this, Niall, if you can, into some sort of context for us. How big does this feel?
This is a huge story here in Washington and across the US, Emily. I think myself this is probably the biggest crisis we've seen since President Trump fired James Comey, the then FBI director, last year. This really is something that puts the Trump White House and the FBI in a state of virtual war with one another and raises a whole lot of other questions about the independence of the law enforcement system from the presidency.
So when you talk about a state of virtual war, where does this put the Mueller investigation now? Further or closer to Trump?
Well, it's fascinating that this has happened at a time when Mueller has been talking about interviewing Trump. We'll have to see if the White House uses this as a predicate to avoid that kind of an interview. But I think that this raises questions, at least in Trump skeptics' minds, about obstruction of justice, which is already what Robert Mueller is looking into. So in that sense, it doesn't really help the president in the broader picture.
Did the Democrats then get something fundamentally wrong here? Are they recognising that fairly serious errors were made that have played right into Trump's understanding of that narrative?
Well, it's debatable. I mean, there were certainly errors that have been seized upon by Republicans and by people, frankly, in the media who are friendly to Trump. Democrats, though, are pushing back very hard at this memo. They want to release their own counter memo rebutting these points. They say that the Republican version doesn't tell the full story. And I think broadly, Emily, there's this broader idea that there are kind of many Trump-friendly hands all sort of pumping at a bellows to try to create or cast doubt on Mueller. And that's certainly a point that Democrats are making vigorously.
And what are the Republicans around Trump thinking or saying to you tonight?
Well, some of them, of course, are very sort of impressed by what they believe they have put out, but others are less so. Even a Republican source that I was talking to was speaking fearfully about the idea that the president would use this as what this source termed a blunt force instrument to go right at Mueller. If that were to happen, I think we would be into the territory of constitutional crisis here.
Niall, thank you very much indeed. Niall Stanage there in DC.
Now, President Trump has called the Russia collusion probe an American disgrace, a day after releasing a classified memo which accuses the FBI of being biased against him. The president tweeted this in the last few hours: "The memo totally vindicates Trump in probe, but the Russian witch hunt goes on and on. There was no collusion and there was no obstruction." And the word now used because after 1 year of looking endlessly and finding nothing, collusion is dead. This is an American disgrace. Let's talk about this memo and its implications. In Washington is Fred Fleitz, former CIA analyst and a former staff member with the House Intelligence Committee. He is now Senior Vice President at the Center for Security Policy. And in Boston is Glenn Carl, former CIA Deputy National Intelligence Officer, now Associate Fellow at the Harvard Kennedy School Carr Center for Human Rights Policy. Gentlemen, welcome. Lovely to see you both. Fred, I'm going to start with you. And let's start, we're going to try and take this in sections. Let's start with this tweet. The president's tweet that this memo fully vindicates him in the Russia probe. True or false?
I have to say I don't agree with that. The memo is very disturbing. It presents information that the Justice Department and the FBI got a warrant to spy on a Trump campaign aide using information paid for by the Hillary Clinton campaign. It did not tell the judge who granted this warrant. That's very serious. But frankly, this is something that happened in October 2016. The larger investigation the president goes on, I think FBI and justice have a lot to answer for, but I don't think this vindicates the president or discredits the Russia investigation.
OK, Glenn, I'll come to you. I imagine you will agree on the point that it doesn't vindicate him. But what about Fred's accusation that the Department of Justice and the FBI have serious questions to answer here?
Well, I don't think that's correct, really, at all. Carter Page, the individual, came to the attention from multiple sources, independent of the British intelligence officer Christopher Steele's report, the Steele dossier. It's called U.S. 5 years ago, at the least now. Independent of that, there have been numerous other reports from CIA, from FBI, but also from British, French, German, Dutch, Estonian, and other intelligence services of connections of Russian intelligence officers with members, individuals associated with the Trump family, entourage, and campaign. So all of those things call obligatorily for an aggressive counterintelligence investigation. If nothing comes up, so much the better. But if you don't investigate, then you're a derelict.
OK, Fred, this memo puts too much focus on the Christopher Steele dossier, and what Glenn's saying is effectively there was plenty more evidence that this memo doesn't reveal that legitimised the issuing of a warrant.
Well, if what Glenn said is correct, I would agree with him. But Andy McCabe is quoted in the memo, his former deputy FBI director, that this memo, the Steele dossier, was central to getting the warrant for spying on Carter Page. Now, that's either true or it isn't. There's a transcript that hasn't been released yet. The Democrats are saying it isn't true, whether it's been taken out of context. You know, the House Republicans, the House Intelligence Committee, I think they have to let that transcript out to find out, what did McCabe say? Did he really say that the Steele dossier that was paid for by the Democrats was central to getting this warrant to spy on Trump campaign aid?
I mean, Glenn, surely even if the dossier was only a small part of the reason they had this warrant issued, the fact that it was paid for by the Democrats and Mr. Steele was paid by the Democrats is an issue here.
Well, no, that's not actually correct. I mean, that's the assertion of the Republican leadership and Donald Trump, of course. But the initial individuals paying for the report were actually Republican opposition research entities working for then presidential candidates. But that itself is secondary. What counts is not the glitter and the provenance, but the facts. You know, if I'm left-handed or right-handed is irrelevant if the question is, is 2 and 2 4, and the answer I'm giving is 4. You know, that's the issue, or the facts. And there have been in public domain over 400 documented instances, which is a stunning number, of associations of known members of the Russian intelligence establishment with members of the Trump campaign, Trump entourage, and Trump family over the past, I think, decade. And in fact, some of them go back to 1987. So this cries out, as Mr. Fleitz, I'm sure will know, because both of us did this ourselves, both offensively and defensively. It cries out for an investigation to see, is there something there? And if you don't, you're derelict.
Fred?
Well, there was an interview on MSNBC this morning, and a judge who claims he's nonpartisan sent a message in saying, you know, I don't want to take a position on this, but if I was asked to grant a FISA warrant and I was not told that key information in the warrant request was paid for by another political campaign, I wouldn't have approved it, and I would now be taking action against the people who put in that request. I mean, I think a lot of what we just heard from Glenn makes sense, but the fact that the judge wasn't told that the Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee helped finance this memo is a very difficult thing to get past if you're trying to say that, you know, what the Republicans are arguing isn't true.
But, Fred, is it not the case that the memo itself never says that the application to monitor Carter Page was illegal? It might be frowned upon, but nothing illegal has taken place here. You know, the fact that Christopher Steele maybe said he doesn't like President Trump is not illegal.
Well, see, in my view, from my experience, the standard to use intelligence agencies to spy on a U.S. citizen is very high. And the standard to spy on a member of a political campaign of another party, I think, should be exceedingly high. And I think any judge that grants a warrant in such situation has to have all the facts. And the FISA judge, on multiple occasions, because this FISA warrant was renewed, the FISA judge or judges did not have that crucial piece of information.
Okay, Glenn, your response to that, and also just briefly what you think is going to happen next. Do we need to basically get to the point where we started with both of you, that we need to see a full transcript of everything?
Well, I think multiple times, more times than I can count in my career, and my career was just typical, whenever there was frankly, the slightest indication of a possible association of an individual with activity or an entity that was of concern with a terrorist organization, say I did a lot of work in terrorism, simply a phone connection one time would suffice for us to say, we need to look into this. Dick Cheney famously promulgated what came to be called the 1% doctrine, which drove a lot of our war and terror policies. If there is even 1% chance that something nefarious is going on, we must act as though we know that that's the case until we find that it's actually innocent. What will happen? The investigation will continue, and Donald Trump and his supporters will continue to deny that there's anything there.
One final yes or no question to both of you. Fred, first, is this going to lead to the sacking of Rod Rosenstein, potentially?
I don't think so. I think he's going to stay.
OK, Glenn?
I would agree for now.
OK. Gentlemen, thank you for your time. I appreciate you joining us.
Good to be here.